When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of ERG Power Talk. I'm your host, Joe Santana. That clip you just heard is from a song titled Stand By Me, performed by the incredible Benny King. It reminds us that as humans, we all need support from each other, and never has the need for community support been more vital than today. Building ERG communities within an organization is actually more valuable today than it's ever been before. These groups are essential for fostering a positive, productive, and inclusive work environment and addressing today's workplace and marketplace needs. But it's also super challenging. Here are just a few of the challenges people face when they build groups. Finding and investing the time to run the group, getting and keeping your ERG on the radar of people who may not see it as a priority, continuously engaging and retaining members. It's not enough to create a community. You need to continue to engage that community and provide value to them. Managing conflict within the community. And finally, sustaining your energy and drive to keep that community going over the long term. Building a community is not a one-time event. It requires ongoing effort and commitment. So how can you tackle all these challenges and continue to build and keep a strong community? Well, to help us answer that and other questions, we have a special guest with us today for this episode of ERG Power Talk. But before we introduce our guest, let's take a moment to review our mission and acknowledge our sponsors. This is ERG Power Talk, and I'm your host, Joe Santana. The purpose of ERG Power Talk is to provide a virtual forum for the exchange of great ideas and inspiration for ERG leaders, as well as others interested in supporting ERGs. No more waiting until the next conference and praying that you get the budget to travel to the conference in order to find great ideas and stimulation towards action. Just subscribe and listen at your convenience. Before we begin, a quick note of thanks to our supporters and sponsors. UL Solutions, CVS Health, Dollar General, Freighter Health, and Wisconsin Medical College, Hiscox, Mass Mutual, McCormick, Tapestry, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, MIT Lincoln Laboratory, Elastic, Oshkosh Corporation, Peace Health, Pitney Bowes, Daimler Trucks North America, and Sony Pictures Entertainment. Now, let's go straight to the program. He is a former executive at Johnson & Johnson who led a team focused on driving a culture of innovation. This grassroots transformational movement engaged 23,000 employees globally. And today, he is the CEO and founder of Cultivate, an organization that helps their clients to activate grassroots movements and empower the people in their organizations to reach their full potential. In his work, he's traveled to over 100 countries and worked with organizations worldwide to build communities of empowered cultivators.
Joe, thank you so much. I'm Steve Garguilo. I am the founder and CEO of Cultivate. Of course, right at the exact moment that I get to unmute myself and introduce myself, we have a dog barking outside, but thank you for your patience with me. I'm really excited for the opportunity to talk about workplace communities today and ERGs specifically. Like you said in your intro, there are a lot of challenges that face ERGs, and of course, the impact of them in helping to address challenges in organizations is so great, and so it's worth going through those challenges. But man, I hope you don't expect me to answer all those questions. I don't know that I have answers to all those things, but I'm excited to dig in.
Steve, welcome to ERG Power Talk. I'm sure you're going to do a great job today. So let's start off with you telling us a little more about your background and what led you into your current role.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually an engineer by education, which I know is maybe atypical for folks working in talent development. Although I think a lot of folks who do this kind of work find ourselves here from a variety of different backgrounds. My degree is in something called humanitarian engineering and social entrepreneurship. So it was very much a design for global challenges. I had the opportunity in college to spend time living in India and in Kenya, working on various different types of design projects. And that actually led me after school and after some of that work to have the opportunity to go work at J&J and go work at Johnson & Johnson, right? 140,000 person massive global healthcare company. And I come in as this young, optimistic 22-year-old, ready to take on the world, ready to make my ideas happen. And then, found it very fascinating to try to learn, how does that all work? How do you make ideas happen inside a big company? Who's successful at doing that? How can they be successful at doing that? And so I started trying to collect the most interesting people in the company and learn from them in terms of what they had, been able to do. And I had been very involved in the TED community during my time in school. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to organize something like TEDx inside of a company and give an opportunity for how do we showcase people's ideas, showcase, how they were made to happen originally selfishly so that I could think, well, how do I make my ideas happen? But also, how do we help anyone in the organization to advance ideas, right? And so while I didn't have the language at the time, what I was really doing was starting to build a community inside the company, a community of troublemakers, change makers, idea makers, people who wanted to challenge the status quo. And so after doing that kind of on the side of my desk for a while, which may sound very familiar to our ERG organizers in the room, right? Oftentimes that's a side of our desk activity. Oftentimes that's an informal activity that might not have organizational blessing at the beginning, right? Maybe just something we're doing. So it was very much like I was building a community just as a thing to do. Didn't even know that's what I was doing. And about 2 years into doing that, got an opportunity to, essentially got a phone call from the head of HR at the company who was like, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Invited me for an opportunity to meet. And about 10 minutes into that meeting, offered me a job and said, hey, I think what you're doing here in terms of building a community of innovators can be really valuable for the company. Why don't we spin up a department focused on this? And so then for 5 years, got to build out this whole department on creative engagement, build a massive community at J&J. And then post J&J have built this company, Cultivate. We're a small but mighty team of 18 of us that we're a small company focused on making big companies more empowering places to work. And we do a lot of work that's focused on community building, empowerment. How do we focus on supporting the little guys, people without traditional power to really make massive organizational change? And so that's the kind of stuff I get really excited about. And ERGs are such a good example of that, right? Of a group of empowered employees who oftentimes might not have traditional power, who can really affect positive change in an amazing way. So yeah, that's a little bit kind of how I got to where I'm at, the kind of stuff that's really exciting to me. And Joe, I've had the chance to listen to a number of episodes of your podcast, and so I know that the kinds of conversations you have are conversations that are near and dear to my heart too. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And by the way, you sound like you really found your passion there, which is a wonderful thing. These different groups that are out there, some organizations make bigger use of them than others do. But what are some of the most powerful benefits that the members in these groups get and the organization at large from having these groups, from hosting and supporting these groups? Are there any examples that you can provide?
Yeah, I like to think of the kind of benefits of I'll talk about how we think about the benefits of workplace communities and then talk about kind of some of the impacts anecdotally in terms of stories. But maybe the benefits, just from a research-driven perspective, our team at Cultivate, we have an amazing head of research. Their name is Chris Benefield. Chris is amazing. I'll direct you in the show notes to some of their white papers and some of their work. But some of the research into what we know to be true about benefits of workplace communities is that, one, they're providing a sense of fulfillment, right? A sense of people feeling really personally fulfilled. The work I'm doing matters, right? They're giving people a sense of additional competence. They're kind of building their skills and things that help with work and kind of help outside of their day job because of the kinds of things that they get to do. It's building a sense of autonomy, kind of a desire to do self-directed work. These are the kinds of things that I want to do, right? And then as well, like the sense of connection to others and belonging. And so we know that those are some of the things that are benefits to individuals. But when we think about the benefits to the organization, of course, you can cite plenty of statistics around retention, commitment to the organization, advancement in the organization, those kinds of things. But I love talking about kind of anecdotes, right? During my time at J&J, one of the coolest parts of my job was the fact that like my office just got visitors from people who wanted to make things happen. And I just got to jam with them and help them think about, what would it mean to make something like that happen? And one day, one of those visitors was a woman named Shalina Ramnarine. And Shalina is a statistician at J&J. And she's like, hey, as a J&J employee, I want to be a consumer of J&J's products. But as a Black woman, I don't think that J&J's products are serving me. I'm not able to use our hair care products. Band-Aids come in one shade, beige. That's not too discreet. If I got a cut on my finger, putting one of those things on, right? And so she's like, I think that there's a way that we can be serving a broader total available market. We can be serving consumers like me. Could I make that happen? It's like, of course you can make that happen. But it's all up to you. What are you willing to do in terms of all the meetings involved, all the stakeholder and kind of all the work. But like, it takes that. If you want to be a change maker inside an organization, it takes a massive amount of willingness and effort. And she said, I have that. And so she led an incredible community of innovators inside the organization to launch a set of beauty products that properly serve Black consumers. But two, also like 100 years after the creation of the Band-Aid, 100 years after a corporate innovator himself, who was essentially a cotton buyer in the organization, what we would call procurement today, had the idea for the Band-Aid, an employee-led initiative, which led to the Band-Aid, one of the most iconic brands of the 20th century. It took 100 years plus then Shalina to say, hey, how do we advance something further that's more equitable, representative, and appropriate for the variety of consumers that we serve. And so those kinds of stories are the things that get me most excited about this work, is the impact as it relates to products, as it relates to impact for, people in the world, that kind of stuff. I know, Joe, in some of our past conversations before, we've talked about similar things from American Airlines or from Hallmark, right? Of people inside organizations, particularly people inside ERGs, advancing, new products. It's kind of serve new consumers, that kind of stuff. So I love those because they're super illustrative. But then, of course, there's plenty of data that backs up these impact as well.
Absolutely. It's really powerful. We've had a lot of stories that we've shared with each other about how these groups have brought about a tremendous amount of impact. There's clearly a business benefit there. In fact, if you look at most organizations and you explore their history of how they expanded their markets into different areas, I would say 99% of the time, you're going to find out that these are ideas that came from the bottom up through employees and through other people in the organization who either belonged to different groups or had access to other people that they were able to communicate these ideas to. They did not come from a bunch of people sitting in a room who had similar degrees having a eureka moment. They actually came through these types of experiences that you were just talking about. So clearly a lot of value there for the organization and definitely for the people in the organization. So now let's move on to the question that I think is pressing for a lot of people, which is, how does a busy person make the time to run or participate in leading an employee community? And we know that the world has become busier, the world has become more hectic and more complex, and that there are so many different things going on right now that pull people in different directions that they are compressed in terms of the time that they have available. So what can a busy person do to make time to run or participate in leading an employee community?
Yeah, I love that we're talking about this kind of like willingness. What are you willing to do? Working to make an organization better. We have a name for that at Cultivate. We have a name for that we call that kind of person a cultivator. A cultivator is an employee who creates positive change within their organization. A cultivator is the kind of person who shows up every day wanting to make the organization a better place, who looks at themselves beyond their job description. And I think you really have to be that first and foremost, because in most cases, it ain't going to be in your job description to say, build this community to make the company better. Now we're seeing more JDs like that, right? And we've seen certainly since summer 2020, a lot more people focus on, hey, how do I build out a DEI organization or DEIB or whatever kind of the set of letters that we're putting together to drive these kinds of things and build community, right? And we're seeing organizations start to make hires for people who are focused on community. Actually, Mars is a really cool example of an organization that we've been doing some work with that has a head of community role now that's focused actually not just on DEI, but also how community supports learning and development and a bunch of other things. But in terms of kind of how do you make time for it, I think it's you make time for it out of an abundance of passion and abundance of desire to see the organization be better, and a knowledge to say 2 + 2 is 5. There are things that I can accomplish with a community that I cannot accomplish alone. And so only when I assemble people around these common objectives with a strategic direction can we accomplish things, right? What do we know to be true about a community? Community is a group of people gathered around a common interest. But what do we know about a community that's actually successful is it has to be a group of people gathered around a common interest, moving in a strategic direction. We have to be accomplishing something. The difference between the 1,000 LinkedIn groups we're all in that we will never look at again in our lives, these various communities that are communities in name only, we certainly join a lot of things because we have a common interest. But the difference between those and the ones that actually accomplish something, the ones that actually do something that have impact in the world, is that strategic direction. We're doing something together that we can't do alone. We have kind of clear objectives of this thing we want to make happen, right? The difference between someone who just likes comic books and someone who goes to Comic-Con and dresses up and is part of that, right, is that thing that we're accomplishing together. And so I think what oftentimes people need is the leader of the community, the person like you who's sitting, listening to this podcast right now, wherever you are in the world, washing your dishes or driving your car or doing something, the person like you who has said, you know what, I'm interested enough in this that I want to create community for others. Like that's what organizations need, is that person to raise their hand, start the work, bring others together, because you say, you know what, the impact is too great. I want to make this happen.
And it's not enough just to create that community, right? You need to engage the members. You need to provide value to them. And sometimes that can be difficult because even when you're working with, let's say, one social dimension, like let's say it's a women's group or it's an African-American group, despite that commonality, there's still a lot of variety in there, right? There are a lot of different things that people want that might be different because we're all a confluence of different types of identities and values that pull us in different directions. So when you create a community like that, how does the leader help decide what to focus on that can engage all of those people around something central, despite the fact that they all have all these other values and interests that may pull them in a slightly different direction? How do you see that working?
Yeah, I think you're touching on this point that probably all of us know to be true or have experienced in some way, that like leading a community means actually wearing like 30 different hats at the same time, right? You're a rallier, you're a referee, you're a convener, you're an experience designer, you're a data analyst, you're all these different things at the same time. And that's one way to think of it. Another way to think of it is a community needs somebody playing all of those roles to be successful, right? And so what that means as a community leader is figuring out which of those roles can you play, which of those roles can you not play and you need help for, right? And making sure that you're building a team around you. It can be easy, especially when you're starting and kind of it's just you, to feel like, gosh, I got to take all this on myself. But I think we've probably all seen enough examples or felt the pain of the examples of if we try to do it all ourselves, like we won't be able to be successful. And so sometimes the role of being a community leader means creating space for people to do all the fun stuff you wish you could do, but you have to do all the less fun stuff to make it so that they get to do the fun stuff and they get to make stuff happen, right? I have a cool chart that I can share with you that talks about, shows like community leaders experience over time, right? And that like kind of the level of stress is kind of always constant. The level of fun kind of like ebbs and flows at different points in time. The tactical work kind of oftentimes is more at the beginning, but less. The strategic work is kind of high, but then gets higher as you kind of get, more in the organization, right? And so we have different experiences over time as we do this work, but I think it's about a recognition of what are the behaviors that are required, what are the hats that are going to be required to wear, and how do I set myself up for success in doing that? And that really one of the biggest roles of a community leader is constantly setting and raising a bar for everybody else. Setting and raising that bar for everybody else, elevating everybody else along the way. And you have to be a couple steps ahead in doing that to set up a community to thrive. Because as long as it's just you doing that, there are going to be upper bounds of how much that community can do, how big it can get. And so enrolling others in it in an intentional way to say, here's our plan, here's the value we're providing to our community members and to the organization. Here's who's filling those hats, right? And good news, like we can do that with intention. There's now plenty of examples of successful workplace communities that we can learn from, and we have learned from to set ourselves up for success.
Great advice. As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking back many years ago, there was this book written by this author. His name escapes me, but the title of the book was The E-Myth. And it wasn't about electronics. It was about entrepreneurship. And he talked about like when you set up a company, what are some of the things that you need to do when you start a company? In many cases, starting an ERG is like starting a mini company within your organization. That community is almost like a little microcosm of a company. Anyway, one of the things that he mentioned in his book was, in the beginning, you're going to be the chief bottle washer, cook, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to be occupying all these different roles. So he recommended that you draw an organization map and say, okay, we need all these different roles in this organization. And you slot your name into all the boxes because you're doing all the roles. You're marketing it, you're strategizing it, you're pushing it, and so forth. But one of your goals, and that goes back to your point about elevating other people, one of your goals is to identify other people that have the skill set, maybe better than you do, to fill one of those roles. So you're literally looking to replace yourself in those boxes. But by having that chart, it gives you a visual of what is it that we need. So for an ERG, it might be we need somebody to run an intersectional group with one of the other groups to address this specific thing. We need also someone to plan events. We need someone to source speakers. And your name is going to be in all those boxes, obviously, right? But your goal is to replace yourself in as many boxes as you possibly can. So I think that's a strategy that would work well with your idea of let's get other people engaged and involved, share the responsibility, give them an opportunity to stretch and grow, and to help grow the community. Okay, so let's pause here and take stock of what we learned from the first half of our discussion with Steve. 1, ERGs are a type of small community within an organization that can have a powerful positive impact on their host organizations. For example, ERGs give their members a sense of autonomy to do self-directed work that brings value to members and the organization. They also support a sense of connection and belonging, which is especially important today when some workers are partially or fully remote. In addition to this, ERGs often help organizations tune into larger market needs and help their organizations to advance and expand their business service offerings. 2, to come into existence and thrive, communities need leaders who are cultivators. Cultivators, as defined by Steve, are people who are motivated to go beyond the limits of their job descriptions to create these groups and make the organization a better place for the people in it, clients, and surrounding communities. They are people like you who have an innate drive and passion that is of huge value to the people and the organization you work work for. 3, cultivators build real communities that bring people together to work towards a strategic outcome. That is what differentiates the communities you build from the communities of, say, groups on social media that may share information but do not have a cohesive purpose. 4, successful community cultivators/leaders wear a lot of hats to keep their communities focused and growing. They're ralliers, referees, conveners, experienced designers, strategists, and data analysts, just to name a few. As the leader, you need to use all these skills to continuously set and raise the bar on your community. And finally, 5, sometimes you need co-leaders who bring strengths into some of these key areas where you may not have the required skill or talent. To that end, the best cultivators seek out and partner with other cultivators/leaders who can help them to build and grow their communities. In the next segment of our discussion with Steve, we will continue our exploration of these topics and move on to look at how to best form and manage communities throughout their life cycle. All this and more when we come back, but first, this. I'll see you on the other side. Are you interested in leveraging your resource groups together with other people development assets to make your company a more empowering place to work? Well, then let me introduce you to Cultivate, a little company with a big impact. The Cultivate team, led by CEO and founder Steve Garguilo, collaborates with heads of talent, L&D, and DEI at major corporations to create an inclusive workplace culture that fosters growth and development for all employees. At Cultivate, they recognize the importance of community building, and that's why they focus on empowering resource group leaders and sponsors to develop the skills they need to engage and empower their colleagues. So if you want to create a workplace where all employees feel empowered, valued, and supported, get in touch with Cultivate today at https://www.cultivateall.com. That's https://cultivateall, one word with no spaces.com. Speaking of leaders, what about securing leadership support and engagement? What are some of the strategies that you've seen work well? Because you could start a community and you could be running the group, and the leadership in the organization might look at it as an interesting curiosity that's happening out there, but not really engage with it. So what are some of the things that you recommend doing in order to attract that attention and get that engagement?
Yeah, I love this question. This is a tricky question that you could answer in a few different ways, because there's one way to answer it now, which is like, oh, well, as someone who's been building workplace communities for the last 12 years now, it's almost like I feel like I know too much. And like, I almost wonder sometimes, would I have been able to be successful starting a community knowing what I know now? Because I would have tried to follow too many rules and do too many things. I almost think a beautiful ingredient in the best workplace communities that have started from a grassroots perspective is naivete. The naivete and the kind of bold, audacious optimism that comes with saying, I'm just going to do this, is something that I think fuels some of the best workplace community organizers, because all of the advice out there from the experts would say, you need an executive sponsor and here's how you should find it. But actually, I find sometimes if people start and they try to do that, it stops them from creating the magic of doing it and kind of figuring it out along the way. I think you need some level of unbridled optimism and magic and convening people without permission, because organizations love to stop a train at the station, but they have a hard time stopping a train that's already going down the tracks. And if you can get a train already going down the tracks, then people want to hop on board. But it's easy for a person to stand with their hand up when it's still at the station, right? And so I really think there's some magic to just getting started, making it happen, convening the group of believers. Some folks within that group of believers will be people with various power that you can wield at times when you need to, but starting with those true believers and not trying too hard to say, I need to get the senior person on, because you might end up ruining the intent of what you wanted to do anyway. If you believe too much in this is the thing that will make it so that this senior leader agrees, and now you're like, well, what am I even doing? I've kind of compromised what I imagined. So the ability to will it into existence first, I think, is important. And then it is 100% necessary that in order to scale, in order to make the kind of impact you want to, you can't be adversarial with management. At some point, you need to find some common ground to say, I have these leaders that will support kind of these aspects of my initiative. And I found that like one of the best ways to do that is through like, enrolling senior leaders in a genuine way in your programming and in your activities and in your initiatives. And then you get a true believer person who's not, I'm an executive sponsor and I'm providing direction. Oh, good, I'll give you a pat on the head that you've kind of done good work, right? The minute you have that kind of relationship, now you're like taking orders from them. And like, you really ideally don't want that kind of relationship. You want a relationship of someone who's a true believer, that's a thought partner with you, that will help you think about challenges and help you think about these kinds of things. But like, I think it's really important to not get into the like pat on the head relationship with a sponsor. So working to create magic that enrolls people in a genuine way, and then like bring them along in the journey. Now, maybe I'm coming from a position of privilege. I mean, I know I'm coming from a position of a lot of privilege, but like in a company like J&J, where I had the most experience of doing this for 8 years, right? There are 1,000 people with a vice president title. So when you have a company with 1,000 people with a vice president title, there could be 999 no's out there and 999 people who don't like it. If you get one who can be the person that's supporting it and tackling and blocking, right? And so in your organization, there might not be 1,000 people with kind of that amount of power, but there's probably more than one. And sometimes we get so fixated on the one that we forget about kind of the other people around that could be the true believers, right? So I'll pause there on that. I know that's maybe a too spicy of a take, or maybe it's too cop out of a take, but that's some of the ways I think about this.
I love it. I actually love it. I love the idea of it's not a matter of that you got to know everything and have all this information. Literally, you learn while you're doing, right? And in many cases, you may discover other ways of doing things rather than the formula that's handed to you when you go out and you start doing and you discover and you pivot and you adjust and so forth. And then you build that momentum. And then once you have that momentum, then you go to senior leadership and say, this is what we're doing, and we'd love your support. And of course, you can pick and choose your senior leader who is most likely to be the one to be a good supporter at that point. I think that's a really powerful way to do it, because in many cases, when you propose an idea, to your point, when the train hasn't left the station yet, you're talking to a busy person and trying to get them to visualize this ideal of what you're trying to achieve. Whereas when you come to this person with something that's already in motion, that already has some momentum, and you say, hey, you know what? On our own, we've already achieved X, Y, Z, but we recognize that to get beyond that, we also need to engage other resources. That's a much more compelling story. That's a much more compelling way of engaging that other person.
Because busy people hear ideas all the time, and and most of those ideas never happen because people don't follow through on them or do anything. They don't need more idea people. They need people who are actually doing something. And so if you can demonstrate that you're doing something and that you're kind of making it happen, that's really powerful. We tend to have this idea that money is how organizations show love, right? Like if they just give me $5,000, I can accomplish all of my dreams and make it happen. I need budget for this, right? But money is step 5,000 for every idea. There's 4,999 other things to do in terms of making a plan, building that strategy, getting people on board, making stuff happen. There's a ton of things you can do without money. And if you show that you've been able to make all this progress without that money, and now like you have that momentum, I think you have much better credibility to go out and get additional support based on that evidence and that credibility. So I agree totally.
So Steve, no matter how much momentum you have and no matter how close the community and how well it's doing, any group of people that are on a journey together from time to time are going to face some kind of conflict, right? They're going to run into issues and so forth. How have you seen group leaders effectively tackle conflicts in a way that strengthen the group's ties?
I think conflict can definitely be a killer of community. It can also be an enabler when we can have good conflict, right? And Brene Brown talks a lot about this kind of stuff and having, good conflict and like the kind of psychological safety of still waters can be an illusion. If there's a lot of kind of, fighting underneath, you actually want the kind of rumbling waters, but the good kind of rumbling. I think that comes with like being able to set up a team that has trust and psychological safety and all, the latest buzzwords that you hear about kind of what you need in a good team. I think the way to do that is by having a clear strategic direction. Like, this is what we're accomplishing as a community. We're all on board to say, this is what we want. Like, we're clearly all kind of working towards that end and towards those shared objectives. And so then therefore, sometimes our passion can get the best of us and we get a little bit upset with each other. But being able to come back to, do we have these shared objectives? It goes to the role of one of those many hats that we have to play as a community leader, sometimes is referee, as mediator. And it's knowing, am I the best person to play that role? Is someone else on my team able to play that role? How do we make sure that that can happen? Sometimes that's why actually having like a third-party facilitator or something like that is helpful. Someone who's unbiased, who can strictly take you through a process and conversation, versus it's really hard when we're trying to do strategic work to both lead a process and participate in a process. Because it's really hard to wear both those hats at the same time, where you're trying to lead the development of a strategy, but also get your 2 cents in. And so just recognizing, and that third party doesn't even have to mean it's someone outside your company, but it could just mean someone outside of your community, right? Who's able to go in and play that role, like whatever that means. So I don't know, I would say it's an important thing to watch out for. I think the best teams have really good conflict and the ability to be honest with each other, but we just want to make sure that we don't, get to a point where there's animosity. Like, there's not time for that in our kind of work. If a lot of your day is sucked up doing that kind of stuff, there's no way you can make time for the stuff that's making progress. So sometimes that can also mean culling out community members, where it's just like, sorry, like I know you were here from the beginning and you helped me get to X or Y. I feel like we're in different places right now. I think you could have tremendous success growing your own community that has these objectives, but the objectives of our community are this now, or whatever, right? Like, I just think none of us have time to be constantly dealing with those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And those are great ideas. I mean, sometimes you can have a powerful partner that together helps you launch something, but there comes a time when maybe you have to go in a different direction. They need to spin out, create their own group, or you need to create another group to continue on some other path. So great advice there. So that brings us to sort of a related question, which is that people evolve and their needs evolve and their values evolve. And when you're a group leader, that group and all those people that are around you are evolving, just like you're evolving. How do you, as a group leader, keep engaged and fresh in connection with that group so you stay in tune with the needs of the group and also some of the objectives that you have? What are some of the things that you see work in order to achieve that?
Yeah, I think one is kind of definitely going back to like, what kind of community am I trying to be? Am I trying to be a support community? Am I trying to be a change community? Am I trying to be a social community? Am I trying to be like this? Like there are a variety of different kind of intentional decisions that we make. And it's easy to say, well, we're all those. And like, you might be any number of those at different moments in time, but there's probably got to be a number one thing that we're focused on right now. And maybe that relates to almost like a Maslow's hierarchy in an organization, right? Where oftentimes like, hey, the reason ERGs were started kind of when we look way back, right, was that like oftentimes it was about support, shared support of like being in an affinity group, in a minority group. How can we have support for each other in the workplace? Because it's hard to just be in the workplace, right? And so it might be that that's our focus. But I think what we've seen in recent years is ERGs have taken on different roles where sometimes if those support needs are met, then we start to take on kind of this other role of saying, actually, we want to advocate for policy change and we want to advocate for kind of leadership representation. Sometimes then we want to advocate for recruiting efforts and kind of building talent and building pipeline. And then sometimes it's for we want to change products and we want to change. And so kind of where we are kind of in that, I think, tends to evolve over time. But I think being clear as a community and being on the same page about which of those we are, I think goes back to the last point of if different community leaders are at different places in there, that's where you may have tension of kind of what is this community for? And maybe we should bifurcate and split out and be different communities with different objectives. But I think it's like, it goes back to that intention, I would say, as one. Another maybe spicy take would be like, not all communities have to exist forever in perpetuity. Sometimes communities have a point in time that they exist for this reason, and then you actually accomplish your strategic objective, and you don't have to continue to exist as a community in that same way. And so like, it's interesting to imagine like communities that have like clear objectives, those objectives can be met. And then those community needs either can change because we say we have new objectives as a community, or like, that community could dissipate and a new one could start or something like that, right? But I think you're right that like all of our community needs change, our needs change. I think it's important for us to try to separate our identities from our communities. We can easily start to think of those as one and the same, and that our community success is our success. We can become known as the blank guy or gal or person, right? Like, oh yeah, you're the TEDx guy, right? Or, oh yeah, you're the Black ERG guy, or you're the, and it's like, that becomes dangerous if all of a sudden your identity and your self-worth and your compensation and all these things are kind of tied up in that part of your identity. I think it's important at some point to get kind of space from those kinds of things. We can have a lot of passion for our community work, but we do want to make space for others and do, smart things like succession planning and allowing other people to become the face of things. And we can go become the face of something else and support it in a different kind of way. So I don't know, some thoughts on that kind of stuff.
And they're great thoughts. In essence, communities, like the members who are in them and their leaders, are living organisms. And living organisms have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And to your point, sometimes it's time for a community to evolve, transform itself, or split and become two other entities that are separate. Or maybe there are two communities that can merge and become a singular community, or partner together for some singular effort that they both share. So it's a very organic way of looking at this process. And the other thing that you brought up, which I think is an excellent point too, is that we want to make sure that we do not let these communities then become the definer of a particular individual who's a leader or a member of it, because that person is essentially occupying a role in that community, but certainly their potential is not limited to only what they do within that community or within that particular role or job that they're doing in the organization. So, Steve, besides your site, what other resources and tools do you recommend that listeners get their hands on in order to improve their effectiveness as group leaders and developers?
Yeah, so I'm super passionate about this. Like at Cultivate, one of our key missions is how do we expand the category of cultivators? How do we help more people decide that they want to be employees who show up and make positive change at work? And so we actually employ a full-time community manager whose sole job is convening the cultivators community, which is a free community space where we're regularly hosting events. We have a big space in Slack. We have people there from a couple hundred different companies driving change. They're not all ERG leads and ERG participants. They're really people who are making change inside big companies. But so that's a space that I think people might get value in checking out if they have a desire to connect with other change makers and troublemakers and idea people and all that kind of stuff. So that is cultivateall.com, cultivateall.com/cultivators. Cultivators spelled CULTIVATORS. So cultivateall.com/cultivators. We also, you can see more there about our flagship event is actually coming up January 24th. It's called Cultivator Con. We're going to have over 1,000 cultivators as part of Cultivator Con. We're going to hear 12 cultivator stories, including 6 of them coming from communities of cultivators. So we'll have some folks leading ERGs at companies like Shopify and Merck and a few other different kinds of people showcasing some of their work. So that's another free resource of a massive event coming up that we're excited. We'll also be debuting some of our latest research there related to cultivators. So really excited about that. And then Joe challenged me to think of an offer specific to this group of this cool community of people who are part of who are part of really wanting to make their ERGs successful. And so we came up with a cool offer for this group too, which is that we have a program called our Community Accelerator. That Community Accelerator is something that we run internally inside companies. We often will run that with ERG leads, and all ERG leads are kind of doing that themselves and setting up their strategy and learning about things like experience design, data analytics, and all that kind of stuff. We have a self-paced version of that course that online that normally retails for $249 that we're going to give every listener to this program access to for free to check out that program yourself. And that might help you as you're setting your 2023 strategy and objectives, is how do you think about some of these competencies of what does it mean to lead a workplace community, and what are those kinds of things that you can do. So I want to make sure that you have access to all those kinds of things. But the number one thing I would say is join our community. If you're excited by this kind of stuff, if you're excited by making change, then you could spend some time hanging out with some fellow cultivators.
Excellent. And I love that name, Cultivators. I think that's great. So final question for you, Steve. How can people reach you?
Yeah, and people can find me, Steve Garguilo. It's an easy to spell name, right? Garguilo. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, unless I get banned. I don't know. A bunch of journalists just got banned last night, but I'm not a journalist. I might be safe. As long as Twitter's around, I'll be on there. You can hang out with me there, or on LinkedIn, or certainly in the cultivators community where I'm very active as well. So I'm excited to meet many of you, learn more about kind of what you're working on. I always love to jam on tricky workplace community challenges, tricky cultivator challenges. Always game for those kinds of conversations, and would love to connect with the kind of people who seek out resources like this. Tend to be my kind of people, right? Just the fact that you're participating in this kind of experience and listening to a podcast like this is already such a great demonstration of the behavior of you care about making your workplace community better. You care about convening others. You care about building awesome communities. You care about building a great ERG. So I'm thankful to be connected with people like this, because you're my people.
That's great. And you know what, Steve, for people who are going to be listening to this and who will not be able to see you, what they won't be able to see is the passion and the energy that I see as I'm talking to you. You really are totally 100% in on this topic. And I think that's fantastic. So, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today on ERG Power Talk.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's look at what we got out of this second segment of our discussion with Steve. One, you don't need to read and learn all the how to form an ERG best practices to be successful. In fact, Steve notes that it is often not knowing what you can or cannot do that leads people towards forming and leading groups that do novel and powerful things. Two, rather than pitching your idea for a new group to an executive to get them on board before you start the group, Steve recommends starting your community, shaping it, picking up some momentum before trying to engage senior leaders. Why? Because it's easier to get the right senior leadership support when you have visible outcomes and momentum toward a direction desired by the group founders versus just presenting senior leaders with a partially formed idea and a few blurry visions. Three, the great news is that there's a lot that you can do to spin up a community that does not require senior leadership support and money. You You just need motivated cultivators/leaders who can pull together people and get the train to leave the station. People who can get things done are highly valuable in organizations because, as Steve points out, companies are full of people with ideas. What they need are more people who get things done. Once you successfully spin up a new community, you show yourself to be in the latter category. That's how you put yourself in the best position to then secure the support you need from an executive sponsor. 4, when you do get to the point where you're ready to seek executive sponsorship, your goal is to find and enroll a leader who is passionate about supporting your community's objectives and missions. This person ideally will become your sounding board, coach, developer, and supporter, and not just an official figurehead or someone who is there just to provide corporate guardrails. 5, cultivators/community leaders need to constantly keep evolving with their members and communities. Sometimes that means changing directions or splitting the group or culling out former partners, building a new group or dissolving a group. As Steve points out, communities don't need to continue existing forever. At times, you may need someone from the outside of the community with a fresh perspective to help you determine the best course of action. And finally, 6, one way to ensure that your ability to grow as well as your community's ability to grow remains unobstructed is to make sure that you keep your personal brand and identity separate from your communities. Don't become the vet or woman's ERG person. Develop your personal brand as a separate but affiliated part to the community brand. There's this wonderful little story I came across that illustrates the power and value of people like you who are cultivators. According to the story, once upon a time, a kingdom needed a special type of rock to build and sustain a new castle wall. So they dispatched groups of people from various parts of the kingdoms and different towns to live and work in a countryside near a rock quarry. The workers and their families found themselves struggling to survive in this land that was somewhat harsh and unforgiving, especially while living far from family, friends, and the support that these offered them. And so the villagers toiled by day in the quarry to send the king the rocks he wanted, and then they spent the rest of their time constantly in a lonely battle against the elements and the lack of a sense of joy and connection that they needed to feel whole and to thrive as people. One day, a young woman named Maria decided that something needed to be done to improve her life and the lives of her fellow villagers. She knew what they were all struggling with and that it was all this similar sense of isolation and a lack of a sense of belonging, and she wanted to find a way to bring them together to help them out. So Maria spent long hours talking with other villagers, listening to their stories and learning about their struggles and their needs. She soon realized that the key to improving their lives was to create this new sense of community among them by creating a variety of different events. So many of them had been taken out of supportive communities and just thrown here together to do a job for the king. So Maria thought what they needed was this new sense of connection. And to that end, Maria began to organize various events and activities that brought the villagers together. She arranged for potluck dinners, community cleanups, and other activities that allowed everyone to bond together and support one another. As the villagers came together and formed this deeper tie, they found that their lives were greatly improved, and they were able to help each other out in times of need, and they were able to support each other through the difficult times. Magic happened. From a hodgepodge of people thrown together to perform a task in a tough environment, they had grown into a community where they felt they belonged. And another surprising byproduct was that this village became the kingdom's most productive work group. Through her hard work and dedication, Maria had created a community that was strong, resilient, full of love and support. And as the villagers prospered and grew, they all knew they had Maria to thank for it. Maria was a true cultivator. The value of people like you and Maria who create powerful communities that support the human side of people cannot be overstated. You are the ones who take people loosely connected as a transactional workforce, held together by the common goal of producing some type of product or service, and you bring them together into a true community of human belonging. So never underestimate the power and value of what you do to create that magic of a better, brighter, and more connected world of belonging for all your colleagues and your organization. So keep on cultivating that magic. Thank you for tuning in to ERG Power Talk. If you enjoyed and got value out of this program, please like us and leave a favorable review at your podcast provider's site. Also, invite others to listen to the show. By the way, contact me if you're looking for an ERG Symposium keynote or a leader for your strategy workshop, new chair onboarding, and or ERG bootcamp. I can run these for you either in person or in a virtual setting. Also, for more great ideas and tips for your ERGs, get my books, Supercharge Your ERGs, 18 Tips to Power Up Your ERG/BRG Strategy, and the new DEI and ERG Frontier, how you and your efforts can rise and thrive in the new world of constant disruption. Both available on Amazon.com. I'm Joe Santana. Thanks again for tuning in.